Hollywood, 1950. 20th Century Fox Studios. A 24-year-old actress named Norma Jeane walked into the casting office for the biggest audition of her life. She'd been trying to break into Hollywood for 5 years. Bit parts. Background roles. Nothing that mattered. This was her shot at a real movie. All About Eve with Bette Davis. 3 minutes later, she walked out. The casting director didn't even wait for her to finish. He'd stopped her mid-scene, looked at his assistant, and said 5 words that should have ended her career: "She has no talent whatsoever." Norma Jeane stood in the hallway outside that office, holding her script, tears running down her face. Every logical person would have gone home. But Norma Jeane wasn't logical. What she did in the next 6 hours would turn her into Marilyn Monroe and change Hollywood forever. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand who Norma Jeane was in 1950. She wasn't Marilyn Monroe yet. That name, that persona, that icon, none of it existed. She was just Norma Jeane Mortensen, later Baker, a girl who'd grown up in foster homes and orphanages in Los Angeles. Her mother had been institutionalized with mental illness when Norma Jeane was 7. She'd been passed between 12 different foster families, never staying anywhere long enough to feel like she belonged. By 16, she'd married a merchant marine named Jim Dougherty just to escape the system. By 20, she was divorced and working in a factory inspecting parachutes during World War II. That's where she was discovered, if you can call it that. A photographer doing a story on women in the war effort took her picture. She was beautiful in that photo, undeniably, but it was a soft beauty, a girl next door quality. The photographer suggested she try modeling. She did. Got some work. Catalog photos. Advertisements. Nothing glamorous, but it paid better than the factory. And it gave her an idea. If she could make money being photographed, maybe she could make money being filmed. Maybe she could be an actress. Hollywood in 1950 was a brutal place for aspiring actresses. For every Bette Davis or Joan Crawford, there were 10,000 girls who came to Los Angeles with stars in their eyes and ended up waitressing or worse. The studios had absolute power. They could make you or destroy you with a single decision. If you were lucky enough to get a screen test, you had maybe 5 minutes to prove you belonged. Most people didn't get that far. Norma Jeane got farther than most, but not far enough. She'd signed a contract with 20th Century Fox in 1946, a standard starlet deal. 6 months, renewable if they liked you. They didn't like her. The studio let her contract expire without renewing it. She was 20 years old and already considered a failure. But Norma Jeane was stubborn. She studied acting at the Actors Lab in Hollywood, taking classes with more experienced performers, learning technique, trying to get better. She went to every audition she could find. Small parts in forgettable movies. A line here, a scene there. In 1948, she got a role in Ladies of the Chorus, a B-movie musical where she had a few songs and some screen time. The movie disappeared without a trace. In 1949, she appeared in Love Happy with the Marx Brothers. She had one scene. Groucho Marx later joked that she walked across the set and gave off more heat than anyone he'd ever worked with, but that one scene didn't translate into a career. By 1950, Norma Jeane was desperate. She was 24 years old. In Hollywood years, that was approaching middle age for an aspiring actress. She'd been trying for 5 years with almost nothing to show for it. She was broke, living in a tiny apartment, surviving on cheap food and hope. And then she heard about the audition for All About Eve. It was a prestige picture. Real actors. Real budget. Real director. Joseph Mankiewicz, who'd won Oscars. The lead role was Bette Davis, the biggest female star in Hollywood. The story was about theater, ambition, betrayal. It was the kind of movie that won awards and made careers. Norma Jeane knew she wasn't going to get a lead role. She wasn't delusional. But there were smaller parts. Supporting characters. Maybe, just maybe, she could get one of those. She prepared for that audition like her life depended on it, because it did. She read the script 100 times. Memorized not just her scene but the entire screenplay. Studied Bette Davis's previous performances to understand the tone Mankiewicz wanted. Practiced her lines in the mirror, trying different inflections, different emotions. She chose her outfit carefully. A simple dress, not too flashy, professional. Minimal makeup. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not just another pretty face. The day of the audition, she arrived at 20th Century Fox an hour early. Sat in the waiting room, going over her lines silently, watching other actresses come and go. Beautiful women. Talented women. Women with agents and connections and credits that actually mattered. Norma Jeane had none of that. Just her script and her desperation. When her name was called, she stood up, took a deep breath, and walked into the casting office. 3 men sat behind a table. The casting director, whose name was Bill, his assistant, and another studio executive. They looked bored already, like they'd seen 50 actresses that morning and expected Norma Jeane to be just another disappointment. Name? Bill asked, not looking up from his notes. Norma Jeane Dougherty, she said. She hadn't started using Baker or Monroe yet. Credits? I was in love happy with the Marx Brothers. And Ladies of the Chorus for Columbia. Bill glanced up. Don't remember you in either of those. What scene are you reading? Page 47. The confrontation scene. Bill nodded to his assistant, who handed Norma Jeane a script. Whenever you're ready. Norma Jeane began reading. She'd practiced this scene so many times she barely needed to look at the page. She gave it everything. Emotion. Intensity. Vulnerability. She was playing a character who'd been betrayed, and Norma Jeane channeled every rejection she'd ever felt in her own life into that performance. For 3 minutes, she was completely in the moment, completely present. And then Bill held up his hand. That's enough. Norma Jeane stopped mid-sentence. Looked at him. Did I do something wrong? Bill looked at his assistant, then back at Norma Jeane. You're very pretty. But your voice is too breathy. Your face is too round for the camera. And frankly, you don't have the presence we're looking for. This is a serious dramatic film. You're not right for it. The words hit like physical blows. Norma Jeane stood there, script in hand, feeling her face flush. I can adjust my voice. I can. We're done here, Bill interrupted. Thank you for coming in. Norma Jeane walked out of that office in a daze. Made it to the hallway before the tears started. She found a bench near a window and sat down, crying quietly, trying not to make a scene. 5 years. Hundreds of auditions. And this was supposed to be the one that mattered. The one that changed everything. Instead, it was just another rejection. Worse than a rejection. No talent whatsoever. Those were the words she'd heard as Bill talked to his assistant while she was leaving. He hadn't even waited for the door to close before dismissing her completely. Most people would have left. Gone home. Maybe quit acting altogether. Norma Jeane sat on that bench and made a different decision. She'd read somewhere that Darryl Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, had an office in this building. Zanuck was the man who made final decisions about every film the studio produced. He was powerful, untouchable, and famously difficult. But he was also known for having an eye for talent. If Norma Jeane could just talk to him, show him what she could do, maybe he'd see something the casting director missed. It was insane. You couldn't just walk into Darryl Zanuck's office. He had secretaries, assistants, layers of protection keeping random actresses away from him. But Norma Jeane had nothing to lose. Her career was already over according to Bill. What was the worst that could happen? They'd kick her out. They were kicking her out anyway. She wiped her eyes, fixed her makeup using a compact mirror, and started walking through the building. She didn't know where Zanuck's office was, but she could ask. She found a secretary in one of the hallways. "Excuse me, I have a meeting with Mr. Zanuck. Could you point me toward his office?" The secretary looked suspicious. "You have a meeting? What's your name?" "Norma Jeane Dougherty." The secretary checked a list. "I don't see you on the schedule. It must have been added late. Could you just tell me where his office is? I don't want to be late." Most people would have left. Gone home. Maybe quit acting altogether. Norma Jeane sat on that bench and made a different decision. She'd read somewhere that Darryl Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, had an office in this building. Zanuck was the man who made final decisions about every film the studio produced. He was powerful, untouchable, and famously difficult. But he was also known for having an eye for talent. If Norma Jeane could just talk to him, show him what she could do, maybe he'd see something the casting director missed. It was insane. You couldn't just walk into Darryl Zanuck's office. He had secretaries, assistants, layers of protection keeping random actresses away from him. But Norma Jeane had nothing to lose. Her career was already over according to Bill. What was the worst that could happen? They'd kick her out. They were kicking her out anyway. She wiped her eyes, fixed her makeup using a compact mirror, and started walking through the building. She didn't know where Zanuck's office was, but she could ask. She found a secretary in one of the hallways. "Excuse me, I have a meeting with Mr. Zanuck. Could you point me toward his office?" The secretary looked suspicious. "You have a meeting? What's your name?" "Norma Jeane Dougherty." The secretary checked a list. "I don't see you on the schedule. It must have been added late. Could you just tell me where his office is? I don't want to be late." The secretary sighed and pointed down a hallway. "Third floor. East wing. But you won't get past his assistant without an appointment." Norma Jeane thanked her and headed for the stairs. She found the third floor, found the east wing, found a door with a nameplate that read Darryl F. Zanuck, Vice President in charge of production. Outside sat a middle-aged woman at a desk, clearly Zanuck's gatekeeper. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone making it clear Norma Jeane didn't belong there. "I have something to discuss with Mr. Zanuck about All About Eve." "Do you have an appointment?" "Not exactly, but it's important. Mr. Zanuck doesn't see anyone without an appointment. You'll need to schedule through the casting department." Norma Jeane felt the door closing. One more rejection. But then she noticed something. There was another door behind the assistant's desk, slightly ajar. Through it, she could hear voices. Men talking. One of them had to be Zanuck. Before she could think better of it, before logic could stop her, Norma Jeane did something crazy. She smiled at the assistant. "You're absolutely right. I'll schedule through casting. Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, and as she did, she knocked over a small plant on a side table. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The assistant jumped up to grab the plant before it fell completely. In that 2-second distraction, Norma Jeane darted around the desk and pushed through the inner door into Darryl Zanuck's office. 3 men were in the room. One of them, sitting behind a massive desk, was clearly Zanuck. Short, powerful build, cigar in hand. He looked up as Norma Jeane burst in, surprise on his face. "Who the hell are you?" The assistant came running in behind her. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Zanuck." My name is Norma Jeane Dougherty," Norma Jeane said quickly, before anyone could throw her out. "I just auditioned for All About Eve and they told me I have no talent." "They're wrong. Give me 5 minutes to prove it." The room went silent. You could hear the clock ticking. Darryl Zanuck stared at her, cigar frozen halfway to his mouth. No one spoke to him like this. No one barged into his office. The assistant was already reaching for Norma Jeane's arm to escort her out. But then Zanuck did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a mean laugh. A genuinely amused laugh. "You got balls, kid. I'll give you that." He waved off his assistant. 5 minutes. "But if you waste my time, I'll have you banned from every studio lot in Hollywood." "Understood?" "Understood," Norma Jeane said, her heart pounding. "What scene are you doing?" Zanuck asked. "The confrontation scene from All About Eve." "We haven't cast that yet." "You want to read for Eve?" "No, sir. For Claudia. The friend who gets betrayed." Zanuck nodded. "All right. Show me." Norma Jeane didn't have the script anymore. She'd left it on the bench. But she didn't need it. She'd memorized the entire thing. She launched into the scene, this time with even more intensity than before. Because this wasn't an audition anymore. This was survival. She gave Zanuck everything. Every emotion. Every moment of vulnerability and strength the character had. She made him see not just the words, but the person behind them. When she finished, the room was silent again. Zanuck leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Your voice is breathy," he said finally. "I can work on that," Norma Jeane replied. "Your face is very round. Not conventional for film." "Rita Hayworth has a round face," Norma Jeane countered. Zanuck smiled slightly. "You don't give up, do you?" "No, sir." Zanuck looked at the other men in the room. Back at Norma Jeane. "You're not right for All About Eve. Bill was correct about that. But there's something here. Raw. Unpolished. But something." He picked up his phone. "Get me Johnny Hyde at William Morris." Johnny Hyde was one of the most powerful agents in Hollywood. Zanuck was calling him right now, with Norma Jeane standing in his office. "Johnny?" "Darryl. I've got a girl in my office." "No, not a meeting." She broke in. He laughed. "Yeah, exactly. Listen, she's got something. I don't know what yet. But come take a look at her. See if you can do something." What Norma Jeane didn't know was that this phone call would change everything. Johnny Hyde would become her agent. More than that, he'd become her mentor, her biggest supporter. He'd get her better roles, better auditions. He'd introduce her to the right people. And most importantly, he'd help her create a new persona. They'd change her name from Norma Jeane Dougherty to Marilyn Monroe. They'd develop the breathy voice into a signature instead of a flaw. They'd turn everything the casting director said was wrong into exactly what made her special. Within a year, Marilyn Monroe had a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Not a 6-month trial. A real contract. Within 2 years, she was getting noticed in films like The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve, ironically, the very film she'd been rejected for. She didn't get the role she auditioned for, but Zanuck found her a small part anyway, barely 3 minutes of screen time. But those 3 minutes made people notice her. Within 3 years, she was becoming a star with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. Within 5 years, she was the most famous actress in the world. The casting director who'd rejected her, Bill, later claimed in interviews that he'd always seen her potential. That he'd been the one to suggest her to Zanuck. It was a lie. But that's how Hollywood works. Failure has 1,000 parents once someone succeeds. Years later, Marilyn was asked in an interview about her lowest moment in Hollywood. She didn't name that audition specifically, but she talked about the feeling. "I spent years being told I wasn't good enough," she said. "That my voice was wrong, my look was wrong, everything about me was wrong for films. And maybe they were right by their standards. But I realized I didn't have to meet their standards. I had to create my own. That day in Darryl Zanuck's office, Norma Jeane created her own standard. She refused to accept the rejection. Refused to believe that one casting director's opinion was the final word on her talent or her future. She took an insane risk, breaking every rule, doing something that should have gotten her blacklisted. But sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to play by rules designed to keep you out. Marilyn Monroe died in 1962 at just 36 years old. Too young. Too tragic. But in her short life, she became more than an actress. She became a symbol. Of beauty, yes. Of sexuality, obviously. But also of perseverance. Of refusing to accept other people's limitations. The irony is that All About Eve became one of the greatest films ever made. It won 6 Academy Awards. Bette Davis gave one of the most iconic performances of her career. And there, in a tiny role with 3 minutes of screen time, was Marilyn Monroe, credited as Miss Caswell. If you watch closely, you can see it. That spark. That's something that Bill the casting director said didn't exist. The same spark that made Darryl Zanuck pick up the phone. The same spark that would make her a legend. The story of Marilyn Monroe's 3-minute audition and 6-hour rebellion isn't just about one actress in one moment. It's about every person who's been told they're not good enough. Not talented enough. Not right for the opportunity they want. It's about the choice we all face when doors close. Do we accept it? Or do we find a window? Norma Jeane found a window. Climbed through it. And became Marilyn Monroe on the other side. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold stories about the moments that made legends truly legendary. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of refusing to give up.